Hello Internet, and welcome back to Tech-Xample. Today we're going to be taking a look at the RTX 3060 12GB, which has been making a bit of a resurgence on the used market, still taking the #1 spot on Steam's hardware survey. And with rumors swirling about a possible restart of production, in this AI-fueled hellscape, what can you expect from the RTX 3060 with 12GB VRAM, and is it worth the $200 used market price? The Ampere architecture was a follow-up to the controversial Turing series of cards, arriving in September 2020 to compete against AMD's RDNA 2 lineup. Featuring NVIDIA's 2nd-gen ray tracing cores and 3rd-gen tensor cores, the Ampere architecture promised a large uplift in AI and ray trace workloads, along with a major revamp to the SM unit, doubling L2 cache sizes. Along with this came a double FP32 performance per SM, HDMI 2.1, and the introduction of GDDR6X and PCIe 4.0 on certain cards. However, NVIDIA had an issue. The Samsung 8nm process used to make the dies for these chips was plagued by issues, which restrained stock at launch and would keep the cards from reaching higher limits, at least compared to what TSMC would be able to bring. Fun fact, this was the last generation from NVIDIA to have official support for Windows 7. In an effort to limit purchases by crypto miners, NVIDIA announced in February that the RTX 3060 cards would be able to detect algorithms from mining of the Ethereum crypto and have hash rate, with those chips being designated as low hash rate or LHR as a means to deter crypto miners from picking up gaming stock and pushing them more towards the mining focused chips. How successful they were, well, let's say not very, and leave it at that. Using the GA106 or GA104 die, the 3060 comes packed with 28 SMs, totaling to 3,584 CUDA cores, clocked at 1320 MHz base and a 1777 MHz boost. Despite the different die revisions, the real differences between 3060s comes down to the memory setup. One version of the card comes with 8GB of GDDR6 with a 128-bit bus and 240GB of bandwidth, while the other main variation comes with 12GB on a 192-bit bus, resulting in a 360GB per second bandwidth figure, a 33% increase. Aside from the incredibly rare 3840 SP version of the 3060, the 12GB represents the main version of the card most people should consider, and seems to be the version NVIDIA is considering putting back into production. My particular version of the 3060 is the EVGA XC, may the rest in peace, version, pulling power from a single 8-pin power connector instead of the much maligned 12-pin power connector NVIDIA started putting on cards at the time. This model comes stock with a 6% overclock on the core, with memory being untouched. I'll focus on full-on overclocking later on in a separate video, with these first set of results representing something closer to a stock 3060 result, so you have a better baseline for the older RTX card. Starting off with the synthetic benchmarks with the Passmark suite, we have the 2D, 3D, and compute test. In the 2D test, we aim to see how well a card can handle basic Windows functions such as image manipulation, window animations and effects, etc. In the 2D test, we see the 3060 score to 1030 points, a bit behind the old Fury X, which scored 1095. To be clear, this isn't a bad result. Anything more than 1000 is perfectly usable in every 2D application you'll normally use. It's simply a curiosity. In the 3D setup test, we put each card through a set of DirectX tests, starting with DX9 and ending with DX12, to test both 3D capabilities and driver support. Here, the 3060 scores very well, trading blows with the overclocked Radeon 7, which you can watch by clicking the little card in the corner or the link in the description. Lastly, we have the compute test, where we see how each GPU fares in physics simulations, fractals, gravity simulation, and other scientific workloads to get a sense of professional chops. The 3060 is quite impressive here. forming second only to the 6900 XT LC in my personal rig, which is mighty impressive for a mid-range product. Onto Firm Mark II, where we test the cooling, power, and clock stability. We start with 1080p, where the 3060 scores between the Fury X and stock Radeon 7. 1440p numbers aren't terribly different, with the 3060 sliding more towards the Fury X's results, scoring 4,600 flat. And in 4K, the 3060 is again just a step ahead of the Fury X, but well behind the Radeon 7, placing the card in a favorable position in this test, if nothing outstanding. We move on to the 3D Mark suite, where we have the Firestrike Extreme, representing a DX11 gaming workload, Time Spy, representing a DX12 workload, and, new to this channel, the Port Royale test for real-time ray trace graphics and rasterization. Firestrike Extreme has the RTX card showing off here, scoring over 10,000 points, putting it well ahead of everything but that pesky Radeon 7 is 6900 XT. In Time Spy, the entry-level Nvidia card flexes on the older flagships from AMD, more than doubling the score of the Fury Nano, all while being quieter and using a similar amount of power. In the newly introduced Port Royale benchmark, the RTX 3060 scores 5,212 points, behind the 6900 XT's 12K result. Without more contemporary cards with ray tracing features, or a way to force older cards to do ray tracing somehow, the results will stay rather sparse for a while. Ending the synthetics off with superposition in both 1080p and 4K flavors, the RTX 3060 falls short of matching the stock Radeon 7, with results again settling between the Fury X and 7. Summing up the benchmarks, we see the RTX 3060 12GB usually tussling with the Radeon 7, being just a bit behind it in most tests, but far exceeding what the older GCN flagships can do. If this holds in gaming, the 3060 would seemingly have no real place in the market at the price it would almost assuredly be set at. Our first gaming test is a custom Dolphin benchmark at 4K with 8x SSAA to push the card as hard as possible in an emulation task. The RTX 3060 lands squarely at the top of the pile, just barely beating out the overclocked Radeon 7 in averages and 1% lows. In Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, a modern AAA DX12 Ultimate title, in 1080p, the 3060 again trades blows with the Radeon 7, placing just between the OC and stock variants. At 1440p, the RTX card starts pulling away from the pack, now firmly ahead of the Radeon 7 in all flavors, averaging nearly 60 frames per second. At 4K, the 3060 is again ahead of every other card, short of the 6900 XT, settling in at just under 36 frames per second. In Slime Rancher 2, an open-world sandbox game, at 1080p, we see the RTX 3060 again match Radeon 7, but this time the lows are quite a bit lower. It seems the HPN is helping the 7 here compared to the GDDR6 on the 3060. In 1440p, a similar result unfolds with the 3060 matching the 7, but now the 1% lows are within spitting distance, with just the 0.1% staying well behind. Finishing it out at 4K, we see the 3060 continuing to grow its advantage against the Radeon 7, where it now outclassed the final GCN flagship in every metric. Our final test is Overwatch, a team-based shooter aimed at esport and casuals alike, starting with the 1080p Ultra results. The 3060 is already crushing everything else in the charts, averaging 186 frames per second on average, more than enough for high refresh rate gaming. At 1440p, the RTX starts flagging a bit, only matching what the 7s are able to do, albeit still reaching over 120 frames, so it's still mostly academic differences here. Finally, at 4K, the Ampere card's stronghold, we see the 3060 reclaim the top spot, managing to just barely reach 120 frames on average, with lows dramatically outpacing the GCN cards. Also new to this channel, we have video editing as a benchmark. I did quite a bit of research and pruned the different options down to a chunk of what Puget Bench for creators test for, along with a custom encoding benchmark. The test system has a Ryzen 5600X and 32GB of 3000 MHz dual ring DDR4, and this is the test up for future editing benchmarks unless otherwise specified, specifically to build a database to give as close to an apples to apples comparison as I can get between GPUs. In the Puget Bench suite, we start off with GPU H.264 encoding, where the system scores 88.33 FPS. In the GPU H.265, at 60 megabits per second, the 3060 hits 88.42 FPS. To represent raw editing footage processing, we have the 4K DNxHR standard quality intraframe, where we see 135.37 FPS, and also the Cinema raw red light footage processing, where we get 54.05 FPS. Moving on to the GPU effects set of tests, the extended effects, fusion, and AI test reach 42.3, 40.1, and 63.5 respectively. Puget Bench also has a real-world YouTuber preset, combining multiple workloads into one larger test, including fusion effects, decoding and encoding, and footage processing, to represent what a standard YouTuber workload would look like in the real world. Here, the 3060 reaches 23.93 FPS, making the whole system decently usable for real-world work, if not particularly fast. In my custom video encoding benchmark, using Shutter Encode, we take a 15-minute H.264 MP4 file and convert it to DNxHR, good quality, using NVENC, which took 30 seconds. In the second test, I take a 15-minute H.264 video and convert it using AV1 encoding at max quality, best bitrate settings, to reduce file sizes for file storage and playback. In this test, we have the RTX 3060 taking 3 minutes and 1 second to finish, a decent result so far. The 3060 is an excellent entry-level video editing card, not least because of that high VRAM, allowing for high-resolution timeline scrubbing and playback, but also because of the NVENC and NVDIC, which give a very high quality for a GPU output, preserving most detail in a scene while being quick enough to ensure tasks don't take half a lifetime to complete. Reviews from the launch of the Ampere architecture pointed to how the card seems to scale very well to 4K, which we see here, particularly compared to the older GCN cards. While the raw grunt strength of the Radeon 7 far outpaces the 3060, the better drivers and core realization let the 3060 shine compared to the older GCN cards, especially as resolution rises. It's important to note that the RTX 3060 12GB is only using a single 8-pin power connector compared to the 2 on the 7 and Fury X, showcasing that, even with a subpar manufacturing node, the Ampere architecture can be truly efficient, especially when you consider the Radeon 7 is on TSMC's 7nm node, which is generally considered to be a better node altogether. Which brings us to the whole reason for this video, the possible resurrection of the 3060 as a new product. If you follow the rumor mill, Nvidia is interested in restarting production of 3060s to have a cheaper, entry-level card compared to its new architectures. Entertaining this idea, would it make sense in 2026 for this card to come back? Depends on the price. Used 3060s tend to be around $150 to $200 used, so it would need to be somewhere very close to there to have any buyers because it competes well against other $200 used GPUs. I'm not particularly convinced Nvidia would price this card well, since about anything they sell right now is being snapped up at ridiculous prices, let alone if it makes any sense at the price it is. If there was any to bring back from the dead, this is an odd choice, but one I could understand. Being older and able to be manufactured in an older and cheaper node. But as its own product, right now, I can wholeheartedly recommend the 3060 12GB, so long as you grab it for a significant discount compared to the 4060 and 5060 on the used market. As always, thank you for watching Tech-Xample, and I'll see you in the next one.